Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching this edition of WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Molly Gambhir, and our top focus is the Russia-Ukraine war. United States President Joe Biden has called for the U.S. Congress to pass $33 billion in additional security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Biden's request comes as lawmakers passed a legislation expediting the transfer of military equipment to combat the Russian invasion. Voice of America's congressional correspondent, Catherine Gibson, telling us more in this detailed report.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in Kyiv Thursday, even as Russians bombarded the Ukrainian capital. As Ukraine enters a third month of fighting back the unprovoked Russian invasion, more help could be arriving soon from the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden asked Congress for an additional $33 billion in assistance.
The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. We either back Ukrainian people as they defend their country, or we stand by as the Russians continue their atrocities and aggression in Ukraine.
The $13.6 billion in assistance already authorized by U.S. lawmakers has nearly run out, the White House said Thursday.
We want to be able to continue to provide a range of security and military assistance to the Ukrainians. Now, we strategically front-loaded the military and security assistance we were providing a couple of weeks ago, expedited the delivery of it, because we knew that as Russia was repositioning in the east and really changing their strategic approach to focus on the Donbass, they would need that on the front end.
This new aid would include $8.5 billion in economic assistance, $3 billion in humanitarian aid, and $20 billion in military aid.
The Russians, as you would imagine, will continue to try to find ways to take out all of their air defense capabilities. And we need to stay focused on this. We need to make sure that we're providing them the capability to replenish those air defense capabilities if they are taken out. So this is a work in progress.
The new White House proposal for assistance also calls on the U.S. and international partners to hold the Russian government and oligarchs accountable for the war in Ukraine.
We're talking about the oligarchs and the yachts and the villas and bank accounts and so forth. But if we accept that principle, do you think it might also apply to state assets? For example, the much larger amount of money that has been frozen around the world belonging to the Russian central bank?
In short, yes. And this is one of the things that we've asked our own lawyers to look at, which is what authorities would be needed potentially to seize those assets.
The Biden administration has strong bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for sending more aid. On Thursday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed legislation expediting the process for sending U.S. weapons to Ukraine.
I strongly support this bill, which streamlines existing defense authorities to enable the president to enter into a lend-lease agreement directly with Ukraine and Eastern European countries. I know I speak for my Republican colleagues in expressing my wholehearted support for the people of Ukraine as they defend themselves and their democracy against Vladimir Putin's atrocities.
As millions flee Ukraine and reports of Russian atrocities mount, U.S. lawmakers are aware of the urgency for action.
This is a moment of grave emergency in Ukraine as Putin's army continues to bomb hospitals and schools, rape and assault women, and murder the civilian population.
Biden's request is not expected to face any significant opposition when Congress takes it up for consideration. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
And with us for more details and perspectives is Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone. Jessica, hi. Ukraine has just filed its first criminal charges against 10 Russian soldiers for the deaths and mistreatment of Ukrainian civilians in Bucha last month. What is the reaction like in Washington?
Well, good evening, Molly. You know, Washington is helping build this case alongside the Ukrainians. This relates to those more than 400 bodies found in mass graves in Bucha, Ukraine, which, of course, is a Kyiv suburb. And Ukrainian prosecutors intentionally began this case domestically with an eye towards the International Criminal Court, making it possible for them to bring a broader case against the state of Russia as well as Russian President Vladimir Putin. United Secretary General Antonio Guterres met with President Putin earlier this week. He then went to Kyiv, and the bombs kept falling, in fact, very close to his hotel. So the overall case really here is, in the case of Bucha, Ukraine, that because President Putin gave an award to the soldiers who were stationed there after that massacre, the Ukrainian prosecutors are trying to make the case that he is directly responsible for those war crimes. Molly?
Right, and Jessica, a U.S. Marine veteran, Trevor Reed, is now home after a prisoner swap with the Russians for a Russian drug dealer. What can you tell us about his condition?
Well, his parents have been speaking to reporters, but they haven't seen Trevor in person yet. They've looked at a lot of video of him, and they frankly say he looks horrible. He looks very thin, malnourished. They've been crying as they watch images of him because he's walking differently, and they are very concerned about his health, which is part of the reason we understand he was able to be released in this exchange of prisoners. He was 3 years in a Russian prison for a 9-year sentence in order to serve a sentence after charges were levied against him for fighting with Russian police. And so he is now back on U.S. soil. He is expected to have to go to a military hospital, be fully evaluated, and there's a lot of therapy likely ahead of him as he recovers from this ordeal, Molly.
Right. Stay with me, Jessica. Let's now shift focus to what the COVID-19 situation in the United States is looking like with the new virus subvariant increasing the infection rates across America. The people there are learning to now live with the virus and assess their own risks without returning to pandemic-era lockdowns. With this week's revelation that the vice president contracted the infection, Voice of America's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara bringing us this report on how Washington is navigating the COVID-19 restrictions more than 2 years into the pandemic.
1 week before Vice President Kamala Harris tested positive for COVID-19, she had participated in a White House Easter egg roll, an outdoor event attended by 30,000 people, including children. But the White House said she hadn't been in close contact with President Joe Biden or First Lady Jill Biden since.
There's a regular testing cadence. Obviously, the vice president was tested this morning because of that regular testing cadence. And for the rest of us, anyone who's going to be around the president, to travel with him, to see him in the Oval Office, is tested that day.
Harris' diagnosis came on the same day the administration announced plans to expand access to Paxlovid, the Pfizer-made antiviral pill to combat COVID-19, and increase test-to-treat programs in which people can go to clinics and pharmacies and leave with a 5-day regimen of the drug if they test positive.
We want to lower the severity of the disease that people get if they get infected, and we want to lower the hospitalizations. We want to lower deaths.
Meanwhile, earlier this week, a federal judge in Louisiana temporarily blocked the Biden administration from ending Title 42, a Trump-era order that allows authorities along the U.S.-Mexico border to turn migrants back to Mexico or their home countries because of pandemic concerns. The move was applauded by Republican states, including Missouri and Texas, that pushed for the Biden administration to keep asylum seekers waiting in Mexico.
It's a big win, I think, for border security and the rule of law, and we'll be back in court on May 13th.
But some analysts say the Title 42 ruling may give the administration an opportunity on immigration.
Not just for internally to coordinate, but also for them to work more closely with their partners in the region, not just in Mexico, but also as far as Panama and Colombia, so that you can actually see a better response and preparation for future flows, not just for Title 42, but future migration flows.
Some Republicans in Congress have used Title II as a bargaining chip, arguing that if the administration believes COVID is no longer a problem at the border, Congress should not approve the $5 billion global pandemic response funds requested to support vaccinations around the world. The administration says it is still pushing for the funds. With Biden set to host a virtual global COVID summit in less than 3 weeks, the administration is under pressure to show it can fund its global pandemic response as it pressures other countries to step up to help finance the effort. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
And going back across to Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone, who's with us from Washington. Jessica, the White House is appealing last week's ruling by a federal judge to lift the mask mandate on public transportation. What is the state of play on mask wearing now across the country, if you can give us a better sense?
Yeah, so masks are optional on buses, trains, and on airplanes, but you still are seeing a mix of people wearing them and not wearing them depending on their comfort level, their exposure to those that are immunosuppressed, or the concerns about small children. And the CDC says that, which is the Center for Disease Control here in the United States, says that 60% of Americans have already had the virus at least once. So there is also a great deal of natural immunity going on in the United States. As to the legal case here, the White House has appealed the judge's ruling, as you mentioned, but what they haven't done is ordered a stay on the mask mandate, which lets the mask mandate continue to be lifted as this winds its way through the court. So it's not entirely the case that the U.S. government is pushing so hard to get the mask mandate back that they are not taking that step during this court proceeding. And really the issue for the courts to decide is whether there's the proper authority for the federal government to kind of implement this type of mass health measures throughout the country to keep Americans safe. Meantime, though, as you mentioned, we do have a spike of COVID across the country, and we are actually seeing colleges and universities reinstate their mask mandates, especially in urban areas, Molly.
Right, and American Airlines, it's a double whammy for them, Jessica. Not only the lifting of the mask mandate, but also a shortage of airline pilots. This seems to be pretty bad timing for an industry which is still trying to recover from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Very bad timing because, you know, the pandemic really caused a massive slowdown in airline travel throughout the world, and we were just starting to see it come back. Now we have this airline pilot shortage, which basically happened because during the slowdown, a lot of people took their retirement. They can't fly after 65 years old. Many of them took buyouts, and now we're seeing a shortage of as many as 14,000 pilots, which are needed by the industry over the next 8 years. That's each year they need that number of pilots in order to keep the current routes going. So what's happening now is airlines around the country, they are canceling flights, especially those short flights to major hubs. So they're putting passengers on buses instead of planes. So you may show up at the airport, think you're getting on a plane, actually be put on a bus. They're also creating flight schools to train new pilots. But experts say all of these steps will still take as much as 5 years to get the industry back where it needs to be here in the United States, Molly.
And we are leaving it there for the moment, Jessica. Thanks very much for joining us with those details and inputs. And with that, it's a wrap on the WION-VOA Co-Production.